Good afternoon. My name's Enrich Foster-Jones and I'll be chairing this session this afternoon, and you'll be hearing and seeing some very good presentation, and I want you to absorb that and also think about any questions you want to engage at the end as well. We'll have roughly about 5 minutes, and that's for everybody here and everybody as well at home or in the offices remotely as well. But I'd like to introduce Professor Lorna Hughes, who is the Professor in Digital Humanities and Dean of Global Engagement for Europe at the University of Glasgow, and Principal Investigator of Our Heritage, Our Story, which linking and searching community-generated digital content to develop the People's National Collection. Her research addresses the creation of digital culture heritage and the use and reuse of digital collections for research, teaching and public engagement. Lorna has worked in digital humanities and on the development of hybrid digital collections based on material culture held by memory institutions and at a number of organisations in the USA and UK. Lorna, can I welcome you to the stage, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Reinhard, and thank you so much to the colleagues at the TANK programme for getting us here, and both in terms of the project but also in terms of the wonderful programme for this conference. So this morning in my talk, I'm going to talk to you about bridges. Not literal bridges like the Sky Bridge, but the bridges that connect people and places, and specifically the digital bridges that community archives can build between their audiences and their collections. They use these digital bridges for a number of purposes. They link their collections with scattered families around the world and link back to the communities that matter to them. They link local youth to their heritage by their use in education, and they're used to share inert generational knowledge, and they can also bring funding, income, and tourists from diasporic communities to their homes. For decades, the UK has seen the emergence of a very powerful network of local and community archives, historical societies, and individuals who are creating and maintaining the archives of disparate communities around the UK. These organisations have taken responsibility for telling our national people's history, and increasingly they've adopted digital technologies to gather and record their collections as community-generated digital content, or CGDC, which is the acronym that I'll be using throughout this talk. This means that as a nation, we have access to a rich seam of digital content to help us understand our shared past, and that provides enhanced access to source materials that complement, contradict, and correct official histories and narratives. Over the past 3 years, the TANK Discovery Project, Our Heritage, Our Stories, which again, an abbreviation, is OHOS, has carried out research into how community heritage organisations that create, use, and manage CGDC to share stories and help us understand our shared past, and the signposts in the material and the groups that have developed it can point us in the direction of a national collection. In this talk, I'm going to tell you what we found on this project. But if there's one thing I want you to take away from my presentation today, it's that when communities control their own stories, these communities can build bridges that can strengthen their culture, preserve endangered knowledge, empower future generations, show how their traditions can adapt and thrive, bear witness to their language as it's used, connect older knowledge holders with younger digital natives, and link the community's experience of subtle changes in their weather with the scientific needs of those researching historic climate change. Our project has researched and developed these digital bridges as an infrastructure that enables community heritage to be discovered and linked. Bridges are, of course, infrastructure, and community archives can create the most effective bridges at the local level, where they're most needed and not where central planners may think they need to be travelling. So what are some examples of these archival bridges? So I want you to do a little memory exercise with me. I'd like you to picture something. It's an ordinary afternoon on the island of Lewis in the early 1970s, and something quite extraordinary is happening. A teenager is recording their grandmother talking about the Iolair shipwreck of 1919, but not just as a historic tragedy, but as a family trauma. The Iolair sank in the early hours of New Year's Day in 1919. It was carrying soldiers and sailors home to the Western Isles from the First World War when it struck rocks within sight of the port of Stornoway. The final death toll was 201, of whom 181 were from Lewis and Harris, devastating island communities. The teenager listens as his grandmother tells him how his uncle, Malcolm MacLeod, was lost in the tragedy. The Iolair was a loss that was so profound it was not spoken of in his family, or indeed across the islands, until many years after the event. This personal history is one that no World War I memorial or roll of honour can ever fully explain. The stories of the families affected by the event complement and amplify the official record, giving a long-dead great-uncle a voice and agency he never had in his life. The Super 8 recording that the teenager made is then donated to the local community archive near his family home on the island and stored with other recordings in their archive where it's catalogued. That community archive, Kinloch Historical Society in Ballallan, is now embarking on digitisation and description of that material, using a digital life cycle which we've co-created with them that is modular and liminal and allows volunteers to contribute data and descriptions based on their expertise and the content. The material is now intended for global and local audiences, including local schools creating educational resources. This is CGDC. We'll now visit Cornwall, where a dedicated volunteer at the Morab Library in Penzance is part of a team scanning and providing context to the thousands of images that are part of the library's photo archive. The volunteer has found an image and is carrying out some detective work on the image he's found. It's part of a collection dedicated to the history of film and photography locally. The image that he's found is in an album with very little information beyond plates and dates. So he uses information like dress and equipment in the photos to gather more details, and this research goes into the catalogue and is then exposed to a wider audience when the collection is digitized and made publicly accessible. And this is CGDC. Meanwhile, in a gym in Moss Side stands a boxer, telling a history researcher about the need to urgently document the lives and experiences of the members of the UK's first black-led boxing gym in Manchester during the 80s and 90s, but by saving and sharing his precious collection of photographs, films, and memories, all of which are under significant threat of being lost. Champs Camp was the first successful black boxing gym in Britain, with Phil Martin, its founder, the UK's first black boxing trainer, manager, and promoter. Martin revolutionised British boxing during the 1980s and 90s, introducing new ways of training, and in so doing transforming the lives of thousands of young men and boys across Greater Manchester in the process. He deliberately changed the public association of Moss Side with guns and gangs, helping to produce UK and world champions and make Manchester a centre of the support. This is heritage with a powerful and unique story to relate. The impact of boxing on the lives of people marginalised by race, class, and migration in the UK has been huge. Historians and institutions often overlook boxing and its history. People are ambivalent about the sport and its impact, But if we believe that if things matter to people now or in the past, then they should matter to all of us working to tell the stories and write the histories of ordinary people. And that's why we've been working with this emerging community-generated digital archive. These examples that I've given you of CGDC highlight not just the content, but the ecosystems that create and use it. CGDC isn't just about archival systems of management, but about the communities that come back to this data over time, always finding and being able to add new meaning to that data. And CGDC can expand to encompass new types of content and new interpretations. Kinloch Historical Society, for example, is not only a living multi-generational record of their community, but an essential environmental witness as they are documenting and collecting the histories of wind farm development across Lewis and Harris. Moss Side Stories is documenting not just histories, but works to engage with the sort of people so often entirely disengaged from history and heritage, especially young working class men who can see their own lives within that archive. Morab Library has built a volunteer network to create their digital collections and tell the stories of those who've lived and settled in Cornwall. This is the landscape of community heritage our team has spent the past 3 years scoping and documenting as we explore how we could bring this material into a national collection. Our project was funded by the AHRC to do 3 things. Our technical aim was to explore methods and tools from digital humanities and linguistics at Glasgow and AI at Manchester to building an AI pipeline and an observatory built by TNA for the discovery and use of CGDC in order to explore ways we can connect, harmonize, link, and share CGDC in a national collection. Our historical aim, led by Manchester, was to understand how our national story is shaped by hidden histories in CGDC and how that material can contribute to research across the disciplines. From an archival perspective, at Glasgow, we delivered an extensive process of research into the digital life cycle of CGDC, carrying out interviews, focus groups, and small specially commissioned projects on key topics. This has been the basis for our co-created recommendations and toolkits to support the long-term sustainability of CGDC. I'll say a little more in the talk about how we delivered those aims and show examples of our work with CGDC in scope, and representatives of our totally brilliant team on OHOS will be at the workshop later today, and you can find out in a bit more detail the impact of our project in digital infrastructure at TNA, in AI and in NER, on CGDC and in history. The outputs of the project are, of course, entirely thanks to the hard work and collaboration across the project. But ultimately, all of our objectives have turned out to be infrastructural, technical, historical, and archival, and we need to scope the structures that must be either established, redesigned, or transformed in order to bring CGDC into a national collection. And this focus on infrastructure is appropriate. Ultimately, we're an island nation. How can our island nation have a national collection without focusing on the bridges, the infrastructure that'll bring it together? What will this infrastructure look like, and how much will it cost? These are all still open questions. But those of us who've researched digital collections for many years often have a feeling of déjà vu when discussing a national collection of digital heritage. So there's a need to situate the work that we've done on OHOS and indeed across all the Tank discovery projects within what we already know about national digital collections and about our findings about how to discover, link, and sustain CGDC can inform the policy debate about what a national collection could and should look like, and how that can be taken forward as a concrete business proposition. One thing about bridges is they cost money and they need to be planned and supported over the long term. So I'm going to look at some key takeaways from 3 or 4 decades of digital development in the libraries, archives and museums of the UK, which has been the main focus of my own research. And it's, I think, the shoulders that the Discovery projects sit on. In many ways, the Discovery projects were the easy part, but my God, they were not easy. And the hard work is in providing a roadmap for the future of our national cultural infrastructure as a fully integrated long-term project and not based on an assortment of disparate and time-limited projects. Mass digitization was adopted from the mid-1990s globally, and thanks to the ubiquity of network technologies and enhancements to OCR and scanning techniques, access, preservation, enhancement, reunification, engagement, and transformative potential were our watchwords. Important digital projects like the AHRC's Old Bailey Online, JISC's Strategic Digitization Programs, and the founding of Europeana laid essential foundations, and when Web 2.0 came along, we could finally realize our aspirations to democratize heritage. In 2003, I wrote a book about digitizing collections, and I talked about something called telecrofting, and a related initiative in the Highlands of Scotland where, I'm not making this up, a van went round remote locations digitizing local archives. I've always found that fabulous. I think that is a brilliant model for community heritage. And it was about that time that I really started to get into research into community heritage digitally. Unfortunately, a lot of the innovation in early community heritage digitally was funded by the New Opportunities Fund, using what we now see as pragmatic and flawed processes with no plans for long-term sustainability. One place that initially engaged with the idea of a national digital collection was Wales. From 1998, the National Library of Wales built a mass digitization program using clever approaches to copyright to create free online access to digitized content from its collections under the Theatre of Memory print digitization program. The Welsh Government went on to fund with ERDF, remember them, the EU, a more ambitious project, Welsh Newspapers Online, which was over 2 million pages of 19th century Welsh newspapers, again freely accessible in both Welsh and English. The library also digitized highlights of its manuscripts collections, which are now available in IIIF, and made available 180,000 images of Welsh wills. This built on a Welsh Government aim of the time to develop a digital public sphere in Wales, where multiple initiatives like the cross-searchable Welsh Repository Network built a national online knowledge service. The Welsh digital public sphere is nowhere better evidenced than the People's Collection Wales, so I'm really delighted that Rheinach could be here today. PCW was established as a virtual People's History Museum, and it's been truly transformative in generating and collecting CGDC that relates to Wales and its people. PCW is brilliant and visionary in itself, but it also serves a very crucial role in sustaining community heritage outputs, including those funded by HLF in Wales. We're very grateful to PCW, who've collaborated with us by contributing their metadata to our research, enabling us to carry out development of our observatory and our visualizations. But we've also seen in the past 30 years less positive developments, including the emergence of commercial partnerships and siloization, which I think is most clearly seen in newspaper digitization, where the British Library collections, Burley, Welsh Newspapers Online, all exist as resources in silos that can't be brought together because of wildly different underpinning business models. We've also seen many resources that become inaccessible when they can no longer be sustained. Budget cuts meant that we lost a resource with 500,000 digital items, the Welsh experience of the First World War. You'll see the little Wayback Machine link there, which is the only way to use that now. In the past 30 years of UK digital infrastructure, decisions have been taken throughout the life cycle of digital heritage that mean that our digital landscape doesn't fully offer structures that work for interoperability and free resources at the point of use. We still need an infrastructure that people and organizations can easily plug into to share and use digital heritage. So now we come to the heart of what we did in OHOS and working with community-generated digital content. And this is where we really see the need for that infrastructure. In the past dozen years or so, I've explored the scope and use of community-generated digital heritage in a number of research projects, possibly because I was just so beguiled by that digitization van idea in the early 2000s. It stayed with me. This period in the last 12 years or so has seen significant expansion of CGDC, mirrored by the rise in heritage organizations that are entirely community-generated, like those on the island of Lewis. Digital archive collections have been produced or curated by groups or individuals outside formal institutions, with collections that are either born digital or the result of digitization. The key thing to understand is that CGDC is particularly challenging to sustain. It encompasses multiple types of data in varied formats and uses variable metadata. Data is held in numerous digital archives and databases or websites, which again serve as silos. There is very little resourcing for sustainability, no infrastructure for community-based digital heritage. So I've said that CGDC is an endangered digital species. In research for the AHRC's Living Legacies project before OHOS, I found that approximately 50% of community heritage with digital outputs created for the First World War centenary were not sustained, and I do continue to monitor a sample of HLF-funded community projects and watch the lights go out on each of them one by one. OHOS was funded to explore the challenges of bringing CGDC into a national collection, which, considering the extreme fragility of CGDC, may seem a very precarious task, but I've always been fascinated by the idea that data that is complex and difficult and messy is really interesting to work with. And while CGDC exemplifies that difficulty and messiness, it's at the local level that we do see innovation that can scale up to a national collection. Not just because of the need to do a lot with very poor resourcing, but largely because the involvement of the public for whom this data is incredibly important brings their expertise and knowledge to these collections in a way that would never have happened for the large-scale canonical mass digital collections of the last 30 years. Obviously, the greatest challenge is a lack of sustained funding and the volunteer status of organizations, meaning that their approaches to technology are highly pragmatic. And the biggest concern is that digital is unaffordable. Digital investment is often a one-off that can't be sustained. Within a landscape of no continuity of funding, or at best a range of short-term funded projects, we also sometimes find other challenges like gatekeeping or a mistrust of some academic uses of the content. There can also be a mistrust of large national organizations, which can be seen as controlling rather than supporting, taking power away from local organizations, while at the same time perceived as not offering the required support and training in things like cataloging, metadata, GDPR, and the open workflows that are needed to support the life cycle as an evolving continuum that supports modular volunteer input. Understandably, some now do look to commercial models. However, communities do aspire to creating openness, linkability, shareability, and above all, better access and visibility of their collections that respects community ownership, traditions, and knowledge. So within OHOS, we took all this messy data and we took all these findings about the social and data challenges of CGDC, and we used it to build some technical solutions and community interventions. In order to connect, harmonize, link, and share CGDC, we built a problem-solving AI pipeline for data from data that we were given from a selection of community heritage organizations. Supported by the integration of linguistic expertise and resources, such as online dictionaries, the pipeline made the inconsistent metadata that we got from the CGDC collections enhanced through named entity recognition, which interprets and links CGDC to other linked open data, working with named entities in the data and linking those together in different relationships. The enriched data was then, sorry, that's a named entity slide, that's the observatory. The enriched data was then used by our partners at the National Archives and used to build an open observatory that allows community-based CGDC to be searched alongside collections metadata held in TNA's discovery system and the community metadata contributed to the Manage Your Collections resource. We're very fortunate to have worked with John Sheridan and his brilliant digital team at TNA, who've worked tirelessly to make this happen in a minefield of fast-moving digital development, legal barriers, and complex infrastructure. The enriched data has also been used to create visualizations that show relationships between the named entities and the metadata, enabling a new understanding of the relationships between people, places, and events, and the preponderance of key concepts as indicators of what matters to the communities that use digital collections to showcase their heritage and tell their stories. The observatory also includes remixing tools to enable new visualizations of the data in context and create knowledge graphs of community heritage. The observatory and the remixing tools and the prototype knowledge graphs will be launched as an open part of the TNA Discovery ecosystem in January 25. Building on the pipeline and the observatory, we're also developing dynamic network visualizations to illustrate the relationship among entities extracted from the archive metadata. The network here that you see on the screen highlights the connections between people, places, organizations, and events within the MORAB library. A key hub in the network is right at the middle there, is the Penzance County Grammar School for Boys, which links to new information about numerous former students, staff, other local schools and events, generating a network data perspective on CGDC. Visualizations like this can help us understand the use and impact of CGDC as an important source for enabling new avenues of exploration and enable fresh historical insights and new lines of inquiry, which have been documented as case studies by our history lab. Another major project output has been a post-custodial model of archival management for CGDC and a practical toolkit for its implementation. The post-custodial model was developed originally by Gerald Ham in the 1980s as a means of managing distributed communities of records, and it's a model that addresses some of the challenges of managing CGDC. In the post-custodial model, archival institutions will no longer physically acquire and maintain records. They'll provide management oversight for records that remain in the custody of the record creators and smaller institutions. Management is decentralized, ideally to the communities that hold the records, a process that brings cultural and social processes into curatorial practice, connecting tangible material to the culture, to the place, identity, memory, remembering, and discourses that give it meaning. The model gives communities flexibility to manage some key challenges around working with CGDC, such as rights, ethics, and privacy, as ideally the owner of the original item can directly express conditions for use of the digital surrogate, potentially future-proofing against paywalls and limits to access of data. Having a core of shared standards can support cataloging and metadata development and other collections management actions within a proposed distributed and cooperative infrastructure for community heritage that would enable local management and use of data in distributed yet consistent ways. This could enable content to be further aggregated on regional or national platforms. So, just to, sorry, where are we? There we are. Our project faced a number of challenges. GDPR is an issue, and the different legal basis for controlling and processing data at IROs and universities has caused challenges. There's a need for further work on our approaches to AI, ideally using metadata, cataloging data, ontologies, and authority data held in national and local community archives, which would enable us to better situate the data with regard to future applications, reflecting the key finding that ultimately the national collection is a metadata problem. This isn't even 1990s, that's 1970s. But in addressing the specific linking and discovery challenges around CGDC, our project has also made some breakthroughs. Our key takeaway is that there is power in local community archives and the stories they hold, not just from a content perspective, but from a technological perspective. If you can build a national collection that works for CGDC, you can address a number of key data challenges that affect the digital heritage sector. There's an opportunity to scale up from the grassroots into a sustainable national collection. This is an important way to give power back to the fragmented local histories that have been left out of our national story. The UK is home to thousands of community-run archives and heritage groups, and the advent of Web 2.0 technologies kick-started a huge interest in creating CGDC. So we're seeing collections at scale in a way we don't see elsewhere in the arts and humanities. While these collections may be small in size individually, collectively they offer complexity and detail that enables us to think creatively about innovation required to create advanced access and usage. In addition, public engagement and understanding the audiences for CGDC is baked in to the creation, management, and use of this material, largely because there are so few distinctions between creators, curators, audiences, and researchers. In the 1950s, there was a bold move to build the UK's motorwork network. In the 1800s, railways were constructed. We're familiar with infrastructure projects. We're familiar with the need to be bold when the need is required. And now we need a brave movement in infrastructure to bring us together, culturally, socially, and politically. And to deliver this, any solution needs to be collective, connected, and co-designed. Our future national collection needs to transcend discredited ideas of a monolithic central silo to which you surrender your data, but must move instead to a network of services and solutions that build bridges of data between people and between communities. Thank you.
Mona, for a great presentation. And, from now we can take questions, and we've got 5 minutes-ish. That ish can be defined till about 1:05, and we can take questions, say, here, and from at home and at the offices as well. And we've got 2 roving microphones to go around. So if you put your hands up, if that's okay, we'll take as many questions as we can, and there will be opportunities after as well. And that's the same for at home in the offices as well. Are there any questions at all? Any hands? Okay, whilst you're thinking of the question, I've got a question, if that's okay, just to put whilst we wait for the others in. Did you have any specific issues to do with languages at all? Welsh English is one, but others as well.
Thank you, that's a really good question. So the only fully bilingual collection that we worked with was yours. And the bilingual metadata in that was managed so well in your original data that we didn't actually have very many problems with it. But what we did find was with the Kinloch archive, there was a lot of Gaelic terminology in the metadata. It wasn't fully bilingual, but they used Gaelic to describe specific objects or items or events. That was slightly challenging to deal with at a named entity recognition perspective. So that's something that we're kind of trying to leave for the next time. We did work with the Scots Dictionary, so we were able to do entity recognition for Scots, but Gaelic is probably the next thing. But yeah, the general idea is that the bilingual metadata is not so problematic as long as there are entities that we can link to, but it's when it's all mixed up, it starts to get messy.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thanks very much for that. Thanks for the answer. Are there any questions at all? Just over here. It's over here. That's okay. Thanks.
Hiya. I understand everything's going like digital, and like in regards to accessibility and for whether you're visually impaired or you're disabled or you're elderly, because everything's going digital, how is it going to be made more accessible if everything's online?
Thanks. That's a really, really good question. So we were very fortunate to work with the National Archives, who factor accessibility issues into their delivery of digital services. So accessibility was factored into our observatory and the associated tools. But working at a local level, you are quite right, that is an additional layer of complexity that local archives need to factor in to the delivery of their services and delivery of their resources. And some are better at that than others, simply because they have very, very limited resources. So that's an extremely good question and something to absolutely take back. We have built that into guidelines that we've developed and white papers that we've developed about community heritage. But it is one of these things where supporting that kind of thing at a devolved level across a big network of organizations with very limited resources is something that does need to be prioritized. Thanks.
Fantastic. I'm just going to look towards Javier. Have you got any questions from the virtual sphere? Oh.
Hello.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll come to you in a minute as well. Thank you very much. Thanks. Yeah, over to you.
Okay, so we have a question online. So how has the project ensured there has been ethical and respectful collaboration with community groups?
Thanks. So that's been at the absolute core of what we do, and very early on in the project, our history team at Manchester wrote a paper about ethics of working with community data, which encompasses a lot of expertise across the project. Everything that we've done has been done in partnership with the community organizations that we worked with, and you can see, well, you can't see because the slide has changed. So if you could see the slide, there would be a list of the community organizations that provided us with data. That was a completely open process of negotiation, agreement. All of those organizations gave us permission to use their data for research and to build the observatory. Not all of them have as yet given permission to publish the data in the observatory, as is absolutely their right. So we are not doing anything with people's data without their consent. We are also very careful that all of our activities that we run with community groups are co-created, and that we ensure that there is equitable development and participation. But yes, this is a field where ethics are very important, so it's something that we have tried to document as much as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And is it okay just to go over just to the middle side there? Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lorna. Really appreciate it. Do we need more help, maybe more vans, to get some of the tools and techniques from larger organizations back to the local level? Do they need vans on the bridges?
Yeah, probably. That's a very good question. Yes, absolutely. And I think there is a slight frustration among a number of community organizations that there is a need for quite bespoke help often, and that's the most challenging and resource intensive to provide. So while there are very good general guidelines, and there are organisations like the Community Archives and Heritage Group and Scottish Council for Archives, there are a lot of organisations that do provide support, but it is finding the pathways to the right support. So GDPR is a very good case in point. There is really good guidance on copyright and rights management. You can signpost people to information, but there is very little usable information about GDPR that applies to community heritage, and there is a bit of frustration that is something that's needed, which small local organizations don't have the capacity to produce for themselves. So it's kind of a moving target, and it's kind of keeping up with the field and keeping up with what the community organizations need. But yes, there are a lot of brilliant national organizations that do provide training, but it is mapping it to what is really needed on the ground. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any more questions? Oh, there's one right there, two right there. And is there one question over there as well? We'll take those three then, and then probably that's it for now. Thanks.
Hi there. You identify that it's a metadata problem fundamentally. What I'm really interested in, this may be a bit too early in the whole process to know this, but in the process of doing this, especially building the observatory, did you get a sense that there is somewhere to be chipped out of the stone a metadata model, a schema that could drive a national collection? Or what's your kind of confidence level that that's there to be uncovered and discovered, to be used?
So the challenge with standards is there's just so many of them. But yes, there's definitely core elements within traditional, within standard cataloging and metadata schemes that are usable. And in our project, we actually used remarkably few metadata elements because a lot of the metadata we were dealing with was not very detailed, so we focused on a kind of core. But yes, we certainly could give guidelines. But one of the things that I have been trying to encourage is to make the metadata as rich and as detailed as possible, but within a manageable structure. But again, going back to the previous question, we have found that this is an area where there is real need for training and guidelines and hands-on training for community archives. There's plenty of support about digitization, there's digital preservation, that sort of thing, but cataloging and metadata is something that a lot of people really are thrown in at the deep end. And I have some views about why that might be. I think there is a sense perhaps in official organizations that cataloging is something that people are trained in and have professional experience in, but that is simply not the case on the ground. So I think what is needed is less standards. I mean, yes, obviously it would be good to have a canonical standard for community archives, but it's actually the middle part, which is how people are trained to use that and how people can be empowered to have cataloging experience without necessarily going off and doing an archives degree. So that's the piece of the puzzle that I think there is a need for the sector to address.
Fantastic, thanks. Great, thank you.
Hi. Hello, there we go. Thank you so much. I just wanted to think a little bit about bias, because obviously we all have bias, but I think with many people's experience of community generated heritage and in local organizations, sometimes they can be very personality based on how they've been developed. So how did you go around addressing almost local biases in the project?
That's a very good question. We worked with a small number of organizations that we were able to share our experience. They shared their expertise, and we came together. And those did tend to be archives that were quite open to cooperation and collaboration. One of, again, the challenges with community heritage, understandably, is that a lot of archives have been created by individuals. There is a degree of gatekeeping, there is a degree of ownership. I do think that, however, increasingly these organizations do need to bring in volunteers to help, to actually do the work, to do the cataloguing, to do the digitization, to get materials out there. It isn't possible for, individuals to run everything in perhaps the way they could in a pre-digital age. So I think increasingly, as the sector opens up to students or volunteers or community, so family historians or tourists who want to come in and help, that bias can shift a little bit, and there will be a shift to openness. So I am aware of the concern. I don't have a magic solution for it, but I think there is promise.
Thank you very much. One last question, if that's okay. Just, was there one more, Javier? Just quick one.
One last one. So how do you provide equity for your community partners? What specific resources do you use to avoid being exploitative when collecting data, particularly when using lived experience or marginalized communities?
So we worked on the principle that we funded community involvement. We had a community fund, and we gave out small grants to organizations that helped us with our research. We didn't ask for anything for free. Many organizations were willing to help us without payment, which was great, but we had the conversation with them. So we are very, very concerned about equity, especially working with small volunteer organizations that have no budgets and no staffing. And we wanted to avoid asking people to help us without at least acknowledging that there should be some form of exchange for expertise and knowledge, and that was always an open discussion. So yes, we're aware of that requirement, and it's been fundamental to the way that we operate.
Thank you very much again, and thank you, Lorna, again. Thank you.